All right, so if you head over to OneNote in the revision section, in your approaches section, you've also now got a week 2 approaches PowerPoint. You just go in there and just check that you've got it. It's also on Firefly, so if you go into the revision section and then upper 6th revision approaches, you'll see it in there in PowerPoint form as well. Got it? So we're focusing on all things psychodynamic approach this week. So we're going to cover all of the AO1, we're going to cover AO3, and we're going to do some application stuff as well. So again, all of this is just directly related to what your practice questions are going to be on Thursday. So let's start with the key assumptions. So can you, without looking at your notes, write down the key assumptions, those like fundamental principles of the psychodynamic approach, using the key terms wherever you can? Has anyone not found the PowerPoint? No. Okay, great. Just so you know, we're in the process of moderating the practice questions from last week. So you should get them back, hopefully Wednesday. In the original schedule, it said Wednesday and Thursday, but it's just going to be one lesson worth of questions. Yeah. So Wednesday's going to be like revising, doing everything.
When's that? Thursday?
Your practice questions will be on Thursday. Wednesday will be more of like an independent study, whatever you need to do. Kind of lesson. Okay. So tell me then, what are the key assumptions of the psychodynamic approach? Oh, start us off. Fantastic. iPad's not playing ball today. Okay, the unconscious controls much of our behaviour. What else? Yes.
You've got it has 3 parts. The id.
What
ego,
has 3 parts?
Personality.
Fantastic.
Has 3 parts. And you've got id, ego, and the superego sharing conflict with you.
Fantastic. Oh, another one. Fantastic. What are defense mechanisms?
Got repression, denial, and I can't remember the other one, but like the other one's like where you take it out on another object or something.
Okay. What's that one called? Fantastic. And what are defense mechanisms? Like, apart from just naming them, what actually are they, Becca?
They're ways of dealing with information that can't be done rationally.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah. And which part of personality employs defense mechanisms? Fantastic. So the ego defense mechanisms. They do. Yeah, they do. They help us to deal with information that we wouldn't otherwise be able to. Information that might have some sort of strong emotional component. If things make us angry or upset or distressed, then it's a way for our ego to deal with that and eliminate the emotional content. So let's see. Do we have a pen working yet? We do not. Very sorry.
Have you tried plugging it into the...
Yeah, I've just repaired it again. No luck. Okay. We also said. Oh, no.
Not a good fun day.
She's not a good anything day. Oh, sorry, that sounded more tragic than I wanted it to. Okay, another assumption. Yes, Georgie.
Would our behaviours based on childhood experience?
Yep. Yep. And Becca? Yeah. Any better? None of these pens seem to work. Becca.
Would you be able to also talk about like case studies and how they define things in case studies?
Yep.
Them to generalize.
Yep. You could talk about them employ which kind of approach?
Oh. Is it not idiograph?
Oh, go. Which one is case studies?
Idiographic.
Nomothetic.
Oh.
Nomothetic. Idiographic is talking about. I got myself confused.
Yeah. In my notes, I just understood.
Yes, you're right. Sorry, you are right. Sorry, you are right. So we could say, give me an example of a case study. Little homes. pens. So I think they are the key assumptions. We're going to do a little bit of work on each of those. But before we do, I got a fantastic question over the weekend about the AO1 for the psychodynamic approach. Those of you that have attempted to write this will know how chunky the psychodynamic approach is when writing AO1. And it's very easy to write an entire page just of AO1 content. So just wanted to show you an example of how you might do this. This is still a little bit too much. The goal is going to be to summarize this even further, but this example has got all the key terms. So what I'd like you to do is spend a couple of minutes reading through and using the key terms to just fill in all of those blanks there. And then you can use this as a model to help write a 6-mark outline of the psychodynamic approach response. How are we doing? Done? Done. Fantastic. Okay. Okay, the psychodynamic approach, please, Ali, states that our good. Here's next one, please.
The iceberg.
Yeah. Iceberg metaphor shows how our unconscious mind below the surface and out of conscious awareness holds our biological drives and instincts. violent tendencies and unacceptable desires and influences our behavior. The unconscious also contains threatening and disturbing memories that have been suppressed by the Susanna.
Ego.
Thank you. Through the use of Alex. Great. Becca, such as displacement. Great. So notice here how there's no explanation of what those three are. There's no examples given. It is just, these are the facts. A second assumption is that behavior and feelings experiences adults are rooted in early childhood experiences that take place during the. Fantastic. Stages of development. The stages are the, thank you, anal, phallic, ages, latency, and finally genital stage. Unresolved. Thank you. That take place during different psychosexual stages may result in specific. Freud believed personality is made up of 3 parts. What's this model called? Tripartite model. Fantastic. What are the 3 parts, Ellie? Great. The id is present from birth. It's located in the unconscious mind and operates on the. Yes.
I didn't get that far, so.
Not a problem. Susanna?
Pleasure.
Fantastic. Ego emerges around the age of. And is based on the. Right. It moderates the selfish needs of the id and the unrealistic moral constraints of the superego. Superego emerges around the which stage? Phallic. It's to do with identification with the same-sex parent. We looked at this again in forensic psych when we looked at the development of an inadequate superego and a deviant superego. So it develops during that phallic stage there around the Oedipus complex. And what is it based on? Which principle? Morality. Fabulous. So this is still a little bit too long. I think this is still over 200 words. It needs to be around 150 or so. Where do you think we could cut this down even further? Yeah. Yeah, so we could probably summarize that a little bit further. Yeah. Not necessarily. No, I think it's fine to just talk about it as a method that was used by psychodynamic psychologists. I don't think you need to put that in AO1. Gosh, where do you stop if that's the case?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else that we could cut down here? I really don't know what else to scrap. Maybe this could be just in summarized form. So you could say something like 3 parts of personality. The id emerges age da, and then what X principle, and then you can just go on and summarize it that way, perhaps. But I don't know how much further you could really cut that down realistically.
Could you cut down the psychosexual stages and just say the importance of childhood trauma? Or do you have
It's not necessarily just trauma, because it's like when you're weaned off breastfeeding and that kind of thing. You could, I guess, cut that down and say emphasizes the importance of early childhood experiences. Personality develops through progression through psychosexual stages. Fixations might create conflicts, might create fixations at a later stage. You could, yeah, okay. You could. It's this classic breadth depth trade-off, isn't it? Like you could pick a couple of these and go into a lot of detail. I think for the psychodynamic approach, I think it's probably better to try and cover more, but go into less detail about it. Having said that, you need to know the detail for other questions that could come up. Okay, so evaluation of the psychodynamic approach. Okay, brainstorming time now. You can work with a partner to do this if you want, but I don't want you to just base this on your recent revision. I want you to think about where else in the course we have come across psychodynamic psychology and draw in some of these points as well. So just a summary of them at this stage. I bet you're experts because you've been working on this all weekend, right? Yeah. Yeah. You could, yeah. You're mainly evaluating it, so you're mainly talking about exactly, and yeah, talking about the limitations of that kind of approach. Are we all done? Have we got lots of ideas? Yep. Great. Okay. All right. So, I just want to show you. I don't want to spend too much time just going over the basics of this, but you should be able to at least have 3 really, really strong AO3 points here. So obviously a huge influence on psychology. We're going to talk about this more a little bit later. Psychotherapy, so Freud's techniques, that talking therapy, really laid the foundations for modern day talking therapy. It was the first time as well that we thought we could treat mental illnesses using a psychological approach rather than a physical one. And so really, really important for psychology. And also, as we've spoken about, really important for the world, really important for just like Western thought. It's had huge impacts on literature. Case studies using this ideographic approach, so we're able to gather really, really large amounts of data. And we'll look at this again in a little bit. And of course, there is some evidence of ego defense mechanisms as well. We're going to talk about the psychodynamic approach being pseudo-scientific. Pseudo meaning fake. It's fake science. It is not real science. It is masquerading as science, and it is not. We're going to be talking about a few fundamental principles of science that the psychodynamic approach does not conform to. Particularly this idea of it lacking falsification. And then psychic determinism. You might not have appreciated this at the time, but now you've covered issues and debates and you've spoken about determinism and free will. You will have a better understanding of what is meant by psychic determinism. This idea that our behavior and our personality is ruled by our unconscious, which means that we don't have any control over it. And so this is that particular branch of determinism associated with the psychodynamic approach. Is this pretty similar to what you guys had? Yeah, which ones were you missing, or which ones had less detail?
Evidence of ego.
Okie doke. Yep, same. Same. I mean, it's a small point there, but there is some evidence of their existence. Okay, so this is what I want to do next then. Firstly, let's talk about what this means, this falsifiability and unfalsifiability. What does that mean? This is a necessary feature of science. This was outlined by Karl Popper. Fantastic. Yeah, is that what you're going to say, Charlotte? You had your hand up there as well. Yeah, exactly. The way that we approach science is by having a null hypothesis that we attempt to prove false. We basically try and gather as much evidence as we can so that that null hypothesis that says there is nothing here is proven false. This term unfalsifiable is only relevant for psychodynamic psychology. It is only associated with Freud's ideas. Now, I know that some of you use this when talking about the cognitive approach, but why is the cognitive approach falsifiable? Bowlby's psychodynamic. Bowlby is psychodynamic. Yeah. Becca?
Because they use hypotheses, they generate nothing.
Exactly. Exactly. Like when we're studying memory, when we're studying cognition and attention, we can formulate hypotheses. We can test out these hypotheses. Even though the mind can't be directly accessed, we can still study these aspects of the mind. We can still come up with a hypothesis that the capacity of short-term memory is limited. And we can test that hypothesis to determine whether that is true or false. So why then is the psychodynamic approach unfalsifiable? Why can we not develop hypotheses? Why can we not prove these ideas false? Georgie? Absolutely. Why can't we access it? Where is it? Yeah. This is exactly right. By definition, it's inaccessible. That's what makes the unconscious unconscious, is that it's below our conscious awareness, which means that we cannot formulate hypotheses to test it. It doesn't exist in any empirical sense. It's not tangible. It is by definition inaccessible. So what Freud was saying, he'd be looking at case studies of women that were suffering from neuroses, for example, and he would link that back to some sort of trauma that they experienced during their psychosexual development. What's the problem with doing it in that direction? Yeah.
Because it's retrospective. Like if you see them as a child, he wouldn't predict that to happen, it's only because he knows that there's something wrong with him.
Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. So he's using post hoc. Who are the philosophers in here? Not one. That's incredible. So we're using post hoc reasoning here. We're using reasoning after the fact. It's very easy to take somebody who as an adult is experiencing neuroses or mental disorder and then pinpoint something that happened in their childhood as the explanation for this. What Freud couldn't do, and Charlotte, this is exactly what you were just saying, which is fantastic. What Freud couldn't do is take somebody during their psychosexual development and predict their later behavior and personality.
But surely you could if you were talking about like they had a fixation in the phallic stage or whatever. You could see that that's happened because you can predict.
But those predictions never held up.
Okay.
Like for any one person, you wouldn't be able to say what they'd be like as an adult. All he was then looking at adults and thinking back to what could have happened in their childhood. It's very easy to then have the theory fit the evidence when you're doing it in that direction, isn't it? So by definition, none of the ideas about the psychodynamic approach are falsifiable. The unconscious, well, we can't directly access them. Defense mechanisms, why is that unfalsifiable?
Because it is literally like covering up information that
Yep.
you don't know if it's
So
actually.
we don't access it, exactly. It's the ego burying this information in our unconscious. Again, that information then is inaccessible to us. What about the psychosexual stages? Where are these conflicts happening? In the unconscious mind. So all of these ideas, defense mechanisms, psychosexual development, and the unconscious, it's all happening in the unconscious mind that we can't access. If we can't access it, we can't formulate hypotheses. If we can't formulate the hypotheses, we can't test them to prove the null hypothesis false. Is that clear? Yeah? Because I want you to really be able to explain exactly why this idea, this theory is all unfalsifiable. What's the difference then between something being unfalsifiable and something relying on inference?
Inference, like you can't observe the actual process, but you can observe the result of it.
Yeah, kind of.
That's not really a
Kind
good
of.
description.
It's not a definition that would be
No.
expected. No. Inference is when we are studying mental processes that can't be directly observed. So we have to make assumptions based on the behavior we can observe. So, for example, we can make the assumption that short-term memory has a limited capacity because we can observe that people forget more than 9 items. Based on that visible behavior that we can observe, we then make an assumption about what's going on in the mind, capacity of memory being limited. Can you see how they are both issues with the cognitive approach and the psychodynamic approach not being scientific, but they're very different ideas. Falsifiability is about hypothesis testing. Inference is about making assumptions.
You can't talk about
For this, and you can't talk about unfalsifiability for the cognitive approach. Does that annoy you?
no, I just sent you a 60.
Okay, okay. Why do you have another go tonight and change that bit? It's probably just switching out a word.
Yeah.
It's probably, yeah. I would keep them separate though. Yeah. Because the reason, Morgan, is because these aren't strictly mental processes. So by definition, they shouldn't be inference.
You could say
Yes, but not in the psychological sense of an inference. I think just change out that word. Yeah. Okay. All right. So now, what I would like to do, is to really, really focus on creating strong AO3 for the psychodynamic approach. So I'm going to get you to work in pairs for this and just pick one, if we've got time, maybe two of those AO3 points. Pick the one that you feel you perhaps know the least and will be able to elaborate the least. And I want you to really spend some time together thinking about all of the evidence, all of the counter evidence, everything that you could put into a really nice AO3 paragraph for that particular point. So think about elsewhere in the course where you might be able to bring in some extra evidence, like from Bowlby's theories or forensic psychology, for example, and think about writing a really, really good peel paragraph. If you're not sure which one, I can allocate you to a particular point if you can't decide for yourself. I want strong, strong AO3. Okay. All right. So I'll go back to the original slides. If you'd rather work on your own, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Okay. So how could you elaborate on each of these points to create a proper peel paragraph? Which one are you thinking? Which three, if you had to write an essay, which three would you pick?
Probably maybe two strengths and one limitation. Well,
Which ones?
probably the influence on psychology.
Yes.
Definitely pseudoscience effect.
Yep.
And actually, I might go for the lack of falsifiability.
Okay. You could do all of that as one. Like it could be pseudoscientific because it lacks falsifiability and because
But
they can be related. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There would be like some evidence of the ego defense mechanism.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe pick just one of those
Yeah.
and just think, how are you going to write a really nice, really well elaborated with evidence paragraphs? Yeah. Which one do you like to elaborate on? Just one for now. You could, why don't you just pick the pseudoscience thing and then you can talk about a load of those things.
Pseudoscience can pick any case.
I think the only one you know is enhanced. But so you could talk about the limitations of case studies, you could talk about
Just anything to like get out of the little man.
no. Because then you're evaluating the enhanced. What you want to do is evaluate the use of case studies in this approach.
So you use little hands to evaluate pseudoscience.
Yeah, as like evidence that
Oh,
it's
yeah.
So you need to read up a little bit more on the harms, like what did it actually mean? What were the strengths of that? What were the limitations of it as well?
Yeah,
Have you planned this?
I had a bit of a mad.
I know, sorry. That's really scientific point. Are those three related to different ones?
I think isn't that? I think so. I do think that kind of fits there. Yeah. And you could say that. Yeah, that's. I think we're on.
Okay.
Investigate.
Fine, thank you.
Just put your mask on.
But is it?
When it's talking about cannot generalize, does that mean that you can't generalize it to the general population?
Yes, yeah, that was one very, very unique case study. What Freud ultimately tried to do was use case studies like Little Hans and apply them universally. He shouldn't have done that while using an ideographic approach. He was basically taking an ideographic approach to studying behavior and then applying it universally, and that shouldn't be done. So yeah, that's that issue with that generalizability, that Freud's case studies where it was so unique, using people that had mental illness and then tried to apply this to everybody.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine, thank you.
What was wrong with me? Yeah, the fear of
Yeah. He had a fear of horses, and Freud thought that he was suffering from castration anxiety, thought that that was his fear of his dad, and he used that as evidence for the Oedipus complex. Despite the fact that Little Hans had seen a horse die in the street a few years earlier. That could possibly
That had
be
nothing
it.
to do with it. Oh, on the things to know for the text, it says the Oedipus complex. Does that include the Electra?
No.
Okay.
Oh, you need to know Electra.
Did it not say that? I swear it said that.
Yeah, I think you should know the Oedipus complex.
Yeah, I'm not sure it said that.
No.
What about research?
Yeah. Yeah, they're
No.
gonna. So that miss in these kind of ones, there's never just gonna be like inferential testing.
No. Oh, we're not trying to catch you out. No. There was a sneaky research methods question in the last one. There wasn't there.
Yeah, the quantitative.
Yeah,
But we did cover that. That was.
Yeah, well, you did literally say it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there was not.
We're not going to do anything like that.
Oh no! If you do the original question all half lives for the text, then it's I said generative theories after collecting data. I said primary databases subjective.
Just a reminder, looking at this slide, it looks like you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It looks like you've got 7 different points. What I would hate to see is 7 different non-elaborated points in an essay. How many should you ideally be going for? 3, exactly. Some of these might lend themselves to a nice discussion and counter-argument, but as much as possible, it shouldn't read like a list. It should be a point with evidence and elaboration, examples, and then links. So please don't try and just include all of this. It's not going to be good. Pick a few and do them well. Okay. I think that one would have to be bundled up with another one. Yeah. Yeah, I think that one's a difficult one, unless you found actual evidence of this and you could discuss it. If there's some available, you absolutely can. Yeah, you might find that you don't need to use that point. You might find that you've got enough elsewhere. That's fine. Okay. I would like to show you, and feel free to take pictures of these. But I just want to show you how you can take these points and elaborate on them using your knowledge of features of science, using your knowledge of ideographic approaches and case study evidence, using your knowledge that you've gained elsewhere in the course to write really well-developed paragraphs here. So, can I show you? I've not put these in your notes, but I'm happy for you to take pictures. And I want your feedback. So that would be interesting then to see, Morgan, how it compares.
Would that be one AO3 paragraph?
Yeah. It's a lot. It looks like a lot, doesn't it?
Does it?
This was done in non-timed conditions, so
Right.
you know, this isn't necessarily possible, I don't think. But I've added a little bit more information in here than you guys were given immediately, like when we studied this the first time around. Oh, why is that happening? Okay. Oh, sorry. So just to emphasize just how detailed those case study reports were. And then using your knowledge of case studies, you know, why is this a good thing? Why could Freud be celebrated for using this type of approach? Well, it developed lots of rich qualitative data. There's pages and pages and pages of letters back and forth between Freud and little Hans's dad. So we've got lots and lots of evidence that we can draw upon. However, lots of unstructured interviews, lots of biased interpretation of the data. So like we said, you know, Freud believed that little Hans's fear of horses was due to castration anxiety, forgetting that Freud had seen a traumatic event of a horse dying on the street years before. Yeah.
What does the verbatim mean?
Verbatim, like word for word.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh no, Rebecca. It will come to you again. Read it again, and the question I'm sure will come back to you.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
So would you be able to say that's primary data and secondary he's getting it through the dad that he's getting the
It's tricky because the dad wasn't really collecting data as such, was he? Like the letters then informed the data for Freud. Oh, I don't know. I don't think it's as straightforward as that. Yeah. It's not even really data. I don't know. I'm not sure. Okay, and then our link here, over-reliance on subjectives, case study evidence, means it's considered unscientific today. All of that, apart from maybe that 150 pages of verbatim quotes, all of that you guys can do using your knowledge of case studies and idiographic research methods. Yeah? I'm not lying to you, you can do that. Okay. The next paragraph, I've added then one here on the pseudoscientific nature of the psychodynamic approach. And this is exactly what we were just discussing about this post hoc reasoning, about the concepts not being open to empirical testing and unfalsifiable, about the fact that it's really good at explaining behavior, but not necessarily at predicting behavior. And that's the goal of science, right? Sorry? Isn't that the goal of science, is to be able to make predictions about the future? Guys, any comments about this one? Again, this is nothing that you can't do. You've learned about the features of science. You know what is meant by unfalsifiability. You know what is meant by pseudoscience. So again, this is something that you're capable of. Yes, Ellie? Okay, and final point here. Influence on psychology and Western thought. Now this one, yeah, has got a lot of fluff that you probably wouldn't need to include. But anyway. A lot of this you guys have already covered. So, personality development, criminality. What could be a nice counter-argument for this point? The fact that Freud has been really influential for talking therapies. Yeah.
Oh, well, I think I was going to say just the fact that he's
Oh, I love that, actually. Yeah, Yeah, I think that's a really good point. In some ways, actually, it sets psychology back because of his unscientific methods and giving psychology status as a humanities rather than a science. That's a really good point, Blanche.
Also, for the talking therapies bit, I haven't actually read it, so I don't know.
Okay.
But could you say how it moved it on from like the past treatments for mental illness? So even though his talking therapy is like
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's paved the way for talking therapies, for counselling, even CBT in some ways. Yeah, absolutely. But these talking therapies aren't suitable for things like schizophrenia, are they? They're not going to be suitable for more severe mental illnesses. They're fine for anxiety, maybe depression and neuroses, as Freud would say. Talk therapy is not going to be effective for severe mental illness. But even so, you know, what was the treatment of mental disorders before Freud? You're all doing this. Yeah, exactly. So ECT, frontal lobotomies, this kind of thing. And so it was the first time that we thought we could try and cure some of these things psychologically. Okay, let's do some more active recall then, and then some application. Right, role of the unconscious. Can you fill in what the 3 parts of the mind are? And tell me some of the information that's contained within these 3 parts. So this is Freud's iceberg metaphor. All done? Yeah. 20 up to. Okay, cool. Looks like we might be done. All right, what's above the surface of the water? Fantastic. What does it contain? Good. The mental activity that we're aware of. Fantastic. So anything we're thinking, anything we're perceiving from the environment, everything that we're aware of. What's just underneath the surface? Fantastic. Containing?
We could be aware of.
We could be aware of. Yeah, exactly. So memories that are in our long-term memory. Right. So memories, we're not always aware of them. They're not above the surface at all times, but we can be made aware of them if we just draw our attention to it. What is underneath the water?
The unconscious.
The unconscious, deep. So things that we are not aware of and cannot become aware of. And this is why it's unfalsifiable. So our biological instincts, like our animalistic desires, traumatic memories, all of these things are buried in the unconscious mind. Okay, we'll move on to look at our tripartite model. Tri meaning 3, so 3 parts, 2 personality. So this iceberg metaphor is about the structure of the mind. Tripartite model is the structure of personality. Try not to get them mixed up. What are the three parts to our personality? What's this guy?
Id, ego, ego.
And what are the three principles that they work on?
Reality, morality.
Great. All right, so can you guys just do a quick brainstorm of the ages that they emerge? Again, the principles. Some examples of when they would be dominant. Tell me all the information you remember about them. So bear in mind that I've seen in the past 6-mark questions on structure of personality, 6-mark questions on the role of the unconscious. So all of these could be a detailed question in their own right.
Did you go to that department?
All right, come on, guys.
Yeah,
Guys, you all done? You off? Alex finished.
I want ego miss, I'm sorry.
All right, I'm just going to leave it another minute for those of you who have done that to finish up. If you are done, move on to the psychosexual stages of development and see how you go filling in that table. Yeah. 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 I definitely, know them. Perhaps not so much like the fixations and the conflicts, but definitely know the stages, the ages. Yeah.
I'm glad you enjoyed your intro. I'm glad you made yourself cry.
Okay, so let me just show you the structure of personality, and I would like you to just identify on your notes what you were able to recall, what you've forgotten, what you got wrong. Fill it in a different colour pen.
Oh.
Okay, what did you forget? Nothing.
Not all the most obvious bits of like the conscious.
Okay, all good.
I got most of it.
Okay. Just make a note to yourselves. You know, what are you forgetting? Just make sure that you've got enough for, if you had a question, explain the structure of personality, for example. All right, now psychosexual stages. Fill in these gaps. You should, I hope, have some sort of acronym to help remember the order of the stages. Think about what stage is called. The complex is usually related to that. Yeah. Yeah. So it's like a major developmental milestone. So what they need to get over during the oral stage and the anal stage. What's the big thing that happens that they must overcome? Otherwise, they can't get exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So that's why I was trying to hint that if you know what the stage is called, you can kind of work out what the complex is. How did we go? Any gaps? All right, let me show you then. Now, the fixation column, I've put way more in there than you need to know. You absolutely don't need to know all of that in detail. These are the key bits. These are the key bits.
Why have you highlighted them?
They're the key bits.
Okay.
Yeah. Definitely know the stages, definitely know the ages. You should be able to identify the source of pleasure as well. And I was just saying to Glenn, once you know that, then you can kind of work out what the conduct is and then what the fixation is going to be as well. So they're the main bits to actually just commit to memory. All right, and I want to finish up by doing some AO2 on the defense mechanisms. Has everyone that wants to taken a picture of this? Great. Okay, so what are the 3 defense mechanisms? Tell me, Susanna.
Displacement, repression, and denial.
Fantastic. Can you give me one of those definitions, Emily? You can pick whichever one you like.
Displacement, isn't that when they place their like angle reaction to the food onto another person?
Fantastic. Yeah. Fantastic. So transferring their feelings that are unacceptable from one object to another. Yeah, good. Can you give me another one, Ellie? Fantastic. Yeah, failure to accept reality. And repression. Let's take this one. Yeah.
Like forcing the information out of conscious mind.
Fantastic. Absolutely. There we go. Really important. I've seen lots of students lose marks for not having accurate definitions here.
Not the thing to say, following Emily saying
So again, what I've highlighted is what's absolutely crucial. This is where students lose marks. So repression is about forgetting. It's about unconsciously forgetting something because we're pushing that memory out of conscious awareness so that it's no longer accessible. Denial is refusing to acknowledge reality, and displacement is transferring feelings from one object or person to a substitute object or person. So next time, shall we work on applying some of these? Yeah? Can you remind me that this is where we're at? Yes. I'll come over to you, Georgie, if that's easier.